You just got to worry about the simple things. So today, we're going to look at how to actually start up a session and what all the parameters mean when we starting up a brand new Pro Tools session. Good morning, class. Today. What up, y'all? This your boy Wavy Wayne. Let's go ahead and jump right into launching Pro Tools and starting up a brand new blank session. Make sure that we got all our parameters right, and do a little bit of understanding on what sample rate, bit depth, and all the other little things that may pop up in that dashboard when you're starting a new session. So even if you just beginning, this is how you want to get started. First thing you want to do is actually launch Pro Tools. So on my Mac here, I'm just going to go down to the dock, click on the Pro Tools icon. It's going to bounce around a couple times as it loads up, and then we'll be able to get jumping into that thing. All right, so just let it load. How was your day today? Yeah? Cool. Oh, it's quite interesting. All right, bet. So when the dashboard loads, basically you'll be presented with a few different things. And if you're working on a different version of Pro Tools, like Pro Tools 11 or 12, I don't know anybody working on 11, but if you're working on Pro Tools 12 or any other version of Pro Tools, your startup page or the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all the parameters are pretty much the same. All right, so let's just go ahead and look. So what we have is a few options where we can choose to create a session from a template. If you want to use a template, like in my older videos where I showed you how to actually set up a template for recording or mixing, you can start off with one of those. You can also choose to create a blank session. All right. You can open any of the 10 most recent sessions. The last 10 sessions will be listed here under open recent, or you can just hit open session, and that'll allow you to open any session that's on your computer or connected to your hard drive or any other place, any volumes that are mounted on your computer. All right. But today we're going to specifically focus on creating a blank session. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on create a blank session. Under session parameters. Now, if this section isn't showing on Pro Tools 10, you can choose to show and hide the little session parameters button, but you definitely want to show that so that you can choose the parameters that you want for your session. Don't just let Pro Tools choose your parameters, all right? So the first thing first is the audio file type. There's only 2 audio file types that you can actually use within a Pro Tools session. We got the BWF, Wave, and you also got the AIFF, all right? Now, of course, I'm always going to choose the Wave, right? Not just because I'm Wavy Wayne, but yeah, just because I'm Wavy Wayne. There is no audible difference between using the Wave format and the AIFF format. They're just there for choices, all right? So the default file type is Wave, the BWF Wave, so always just stick with that. Coming to the right here, we have our sample rate. Now, sample rate is important. I'm jumping off the meter, man. Sample rate is important because what we're doing, and when we're recording in a digital audio workstation, we have to convert the analog signal into a digital signal, okay? Sample rate is going to be the number. Let me throw my phone on there. Sample rate is the number of snapshots or the number of measurements that your audio interface is taking of that incoming analog signal. So how often are we measuring that incoming signal? The higher the sample rate, the more accurate, or the more what's another better word I could say, the higher resolution your audio will be. Okay, so higher sample rates will give you a higher resolution of audio. It'll be a more accurate representation of what that audio sounded like in the analog world once we convert it over to digital. Okay, so again, once your analog signal hits your audio interface, the analog signal gets converted into a digital signal. The sample rate determines how many times or how many measurements per second of that incoming analog signal will your computer or your interface take. Okay, now I ain't gonna get all the way deep into the Nyquist theorem and the sampling theory and all of that, but the lowest sample rate that we can use in Pro Tools is 44.1 kilohertz. All right. The highest sample rate that we can use is 192 kilohertz. Now, there's a bunch of debating going on about whether using higher sample rates is even worth it, whether we can hear the difference or not, and it depends on what you're working on. To me, honestly, if you're recording something like jazz or some type of classical music that's also going to be played back on a high fidelity sound system, then it makes more sense to go with a higher sample rate. But a lot of times you're recording some hip hop tracks and they going right down to MP3 to be listened to on some earbuds, then you're going to be really doing yourself a disservice by recording at such high sample rates like 96 kilohertz or 192 kilohertz, because basically the higher the sample rate, the larger the file size is going to be. So you start multiplying the size of the file, your hard drive space is going to be getting eaten up at a rapid rate. All right, so as a general rule, I always just go with 48 kilohertz. CD quality sample rate is the 44.1 kilohertz. That also happens to be the lowest sample rate that we can use. So that means 44,100 snapshots per second of the incoming audio signal. Always go with 48K just to be a little bit better than that. Also, sometimes having those extra samples in there gives your computer more information so that the processing is a little bit smoother when you start doing plugins and all of that stuff. So I'll just stick with the 48K unless I'm doing something that I know for sure is going to be listened to on high fidelity systems, or it's going to like a Blu-ray Blu-ray disc or something like that. Then you may want to go up to 96K or even higher. All right, so I'm starting my sample rate off at 48K. Now, bit depth. So the sample rate is going to determine our frequency resolution, right? The frequency of our audio, whether between the highest pitch and the lowest pitch, the sample rate is going to capture all of those different frequencies within the audio. The bit depth, I like to think of the bit depth as determining our amplitude resolution, all right? The bit depth also gives us our dynamic range, all right? Dynamic range is the span between the softest sounds and the loudest sound in your mix. So having a higher bit depth will give you a larger dynamic range, greater space between the floor of silence and the ceiling of clipping, okay? So in Pro Tools, we have a few choices. You can do 16-bit, which is CD quality bit depth. You have 24-bit or 32-bit floating point. 32-bit floating point is a newer concept to where you can pretty much have unlimited headroom, and we definitely not going to get into all of that right now. But basically, when I start up a session, I'll go with the 24-bit. That gives me a good amount of dynamic range in my system, and also a great amplitude resolution as well. So a couple of parameters that are being converted here. Again, we taking this analog signal, it's going and hitting our audio interface. That signal is being converted from analog to digital. Now, when you converting a signal from analog to digital, you got to measure a couple of things. Well, what frequency is that signal at? Is it high pitch, low pitch, anywhere in between? And also, how loud is each one of those samples? So the sample rate measures our frequency content. The bit depth is going to be the measurement of our amplitude. All right. So I'm just going to choose 24-bit. That's, again, a little bit better than CD quality, but I'm not doing any overkill on this. Right? When it comes to the I/O settings are simply your input and output settings for the session, right? Assigning which input and output paths will be available throughout the session. Now, the default I/O setting is last used. If you weren't the last person to use your Pro Tools system, you probably don't want to choose the last used setting, especially if you're in a public setting. You don't know what the hell or who the hell was on that system last or what their settings were. So to default the I/O settings, if you click on that little I/O settings path there, just choose stereo mix. Now, depending on the audio interface that you may have, as you see, like other audio interfaces are listed here. If you have one of those specialized audio interfaces, you may choose to pick an I/O setting just for that interface. Otherwise, stereo mix will give the default settings for whatever audio interface you have connected. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start off with stereo mix. Another thing down here at the bottom is interleaved, whether you want your files to be interleaved or not. That basically just deals with the stereo files of your session. Now, excuse me, that deals with how Pro Tools treats the stereo files. So whether you are importing stereo files or recording stereo files, if you choose the interleaved option, Pro Tools will treat the stereo files, which are two channels, a left channel and a right channel, will treat that stereo file as one unified file. All right. If you don't pick interleaved, then all your stereo information will be split to where the left channel information will have its own track and the right channel information will have its own track. Now, that does not make any difference within your session. The only time you'll even notice this is if you're looking in the actual audio files folder of your Pro Tools session folder, and you'll see that the stereo file has a left extension, a .L extension, and a .R extension if you don't choose interleaved. Prior to Pro Tools 10, you didn't even have the option to have stereo interleaved files. So for me, I've been working on Pro Tools since like Pro Tools 6. So I'm not even going to choose the interleave option. I don't bother with it again. It doesn't really make a difference throughout this session. So I'm just going to leave that. And I guess the last thing I'll show you is that there is you can choose to show and hide the quick start dialog box whenever Pro Tools starts. If this dialog box is not showing, then you can access all of these parameters just by going to the file menu and choosing new session or create new. In Pro Tools 12 and later, the default save location is the documents folder. So if you don't choose prompt for location down there at the bottom of your dashboard, then your sessions will automatically get saved to the documents folder. Now, it is so important that you always know exactly where your sessions are being saved. You don't want to be the person that loses Beyonce's session and then, you know, you just gonna say sorry. It's too late. All right. So what I always do is make a session folder and be sure to save your sessions with intent. I'm just going to hit OK here. I'll be prompted to save my session somewhere. I always save my sessions in the documents folder anyway, and I'll pick a location of whichever artist I'm working with or whichever project. I'll have a folder for that and save a new save the session within there. I'm about to work with Lydia Caesar right now, so we're just going to go to the Sauce Records folder, go to Lydia, and then we're just gonna name this Xmas Hook. She's doing a little Christmas hook. So cool, I hit that, and then here's my session, all right, with all the parameters loaded up. That's the Wavy Way tip of the day. Make sure you take a little time and pick the correct parameters. If you got any questions on sample rate and bit depth and all of that, I may get a little bit more in depth on that on a later video, but feel free to reach out and leave a comment to ask your question, and I'll jump right back at you, all right? Be dope.